I want you to picture something. You've given 20 years of your life to a company. You've sacrificed weekends, missed your kids' games, put in 70-hour weeks during crunch time. You've made the owner wealthy beyond his dreams, and then his spoiled daughter walks in, takes over, and fires you before lunch on her first day because she wants to bring in fresh perspectives. That's what happened to me. My name is Harold Moore, and I'm 44 years old. Harold Moore, the man who'd been called untouchable, indispensable, escorted out like I'd stolen from the register. The rage I felt that morning could have powered a city. But here's what Grace Hubert didn't know when she handed me that termination letter with her smug little smile. I wasn't just the operations manager. I was the only person who knew how that company actually ran. And I was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her privileged life. But let me start from the beginning. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. I arrived at Hubert Manufacturing at 6:30 that Monday morning in late October, same as I had for 19 years and 8 months. The parking lot was empty, except for the overnight security guard's truck and my SUV. I liked getting there early, before the fabrication floor roared to life, before the phones started ringing, before the daily chaos of running a $42 million manufacturing operation kicked into high gear. The coffee was brewing in my office by 6:45. I brought in my own machine years ago, one of those industrial models that could handle the volume I went through during production crunch week. The smell filled the small space while I pulled up the quarterly projections on my screen. $42 million in revenue, best year in company history. I remembered when Ernest Hubert first hired me back in 2005. The company was doing $18 million then, running 3 shifts on outdated equipment, constantly behind on deliveries. Ernest had pulled me aside during my interview and said, "Harold, I need someone who can fix this place. Someone who understands that manufacturing isn't about the machines, it's about the systems." I'd fixed it. All right. Rebuilt the vendor relationships, optimized the production schedules, implemented quality control protocols that dropped our error rate from 3% to 0.003%, brought in new clients, maintained the old ones, turned Hubert Manufacturing into a precision operation that aerospace and medical device manufacturers actually trusted. 19 years and 8 months of 70-hour weeks, missed baseball games, delayed vacations, phone calls at 2 in the morning because a machine went down or a shipment needed to go out early. I'd given this company everything, and the numbers proved it. Revenue up 133% since I started. Client retention at 93%. We hadn't missed a delivery deadline in 6 years. I took a sip of coffee and scrolled through the client list. Precision Aerospace, 12 years with us. MedTech Solutions, 8 years. Davidson Industrial, 15 years. One of Ernest's original accounts that I'd kept happy through 3 ownership changes on their end. Ernest had retired 6 months earlier, handed the reins to his daughter, Grace, who'd spent the last decade bouncing between boutique marketing firms in Manhattan, burning through her trust fund, and occasionally showing up at company events to remind everyone she existed. She was 34, pretty in that expensive way that comes from personal trainers and dermatologists, and she'd never worked a real day in her life. But she was Ernest's daughter, his only child, and he'd wanted her to have the company he'd built. I understood that family legacy matters. I just wish he'd given her a few years to actually learn the business first. At 8:15, my desk phone rang. "Harold, Grace needs you in the main conference room." It was Daniela Kim, Ernest's former executive assistant. Her voice sounded tight, strained. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Now." I sat down my coffee. Something in Daniela's tone made my stomach drop, but I pushed it aside. Probably just Grace wanting to discuss the quarterly numbers. Maybe she had questions about the projections. I walked down the hallway, past the fabrication floor, where our team was already running the CNC machines. Good people. I'd hired most of them myself. The conference room door was open. Grace sat at the head of the table, in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her lawyer, some guy I didn't recognize, sat beside her with a folder. "Harold, sit down." Grace didn't smile. "I'm good standing. What's this about?" "This is about the new direction of this company." She slid a paper across the table. "I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words didn't register at first. I looked at the document, saw my name at the top, saw the severance terms, 2 weeks for every year, which came out to about 40 weeks, legal but insulting for someone who'd built what I'd built. I looked back up at Grace. You've been CEO exactly 4 hours, and I've spent the last 4 months reviewing everything with my consultants. She leaned back, arms crossed. This company needs innovation, fresh thinking. You're old guard, Harold. My father built this place on relationships and handshakes. I'm building it on data and disruption. Disruption. I let the words sit there for a moment. You know what we disrupt here, Grace? We disrupt raw materials into precision components for aerospace and medical device manufacturers. We have 93% client retention. Our error rate? 0.3%. We haven't missed a delivery deadline in 6 years. That's the problem. You're comfortable, complacent. She stood up, moving to the window like she was performing for an audience. I'm bringing in a new COO, Blake Sands. He ran operations for a tech startup in Austin that scaled to $300 million in valuation. How much revenue did they generate? Her jaw tightened. That's not the point. How much actual revenue, Grace? Because valuation is fantasy money. Those numbers come from venture capitalists betting on potential. I run a real company that makes real products that go into real airplanes and real surgical equipment. When's Blake starting? 2 weeks. I laughed, actually laughed. You're giving him 2 weeks to learn what took me 20 years to build? Good luck with that. The lawyer, his nameplate said Victor Clarkson, cleared his throat. Mr. Moore, if you'll just sign the separation agreement. I'll have my attorney review it. I picked up the paper. But here's what you need to understand, Grace. This company runs because of systems I built, vendor relationships I've maintained, production schedules I've optimized, quality control protocols I've implemented. Your new COO is walking into a machine he doesn't understand, and you just fired the only mechanic who knows how it works. Grace's face hardened. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. There's a difference. I moved toward the door. But you're the CEO now. You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Security will escort you out. You have 20 minutes to clear your office. I don't need 20 minutes. I don't keep personal items here. This was always your father's company, Grace. I just made it profitable. I walked out. Daniela was standing in the hallway, tears in her eyes. Harold, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was going to... Not your fault. I kept walking toward my office. You should update your resume, though. This place won't survive 6 months under her. I meant every word. Security showed up at 8:30. I grabbed my coffee mug, the one Elise had given me for our 15th anniversary, and walked out. Didn't look back at the office where I'd spent 2 decades, didn't say goodbye to the fabrication team, just walked to my car and drove home in silence. Elise was in the kitchen when I walked in at 9:30. You're home early. Are you sick? I got fired. She dropped the coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, but she didn't move to clean it up, just stood there staring at me. What? I got fired. Ernest Hubbard fired me. First day as CEO. I sat down at the kitchen table. Wants to bring in some tech bro named Blake Sands who's never worked in manufacturing. Company's going to implode. When can you start here? The offer didn't surprise me. Edmund and I had maintained a friendly rivalry for years, competing for the same contracts, but respecting each other's work. I'd even referred clients to him when we were at capacity, and he'd done the same for me. I appreciate that, Edmund, but I'm not looking for a job. I'm looking for a partnership. I'm listening. Give me 2 days. I'm going to put together a proposal. Short version. I know every client, every vendor, every production bottleneck at Hubbard Manufacturing. I know which contracts are coming up for renewal in the next 6 months, total value of $14 million, and I know 4 of those clients personally. They'd take my call. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear him running the numbers in his head. You're really that confident she'll fail? Edmund, she fired the only person who knew how that place worked. Blake Sands knows software. He doesn't know supply chains, vendor negotiations, quality control and precision manufacturing, or how to manage a union workforce. Grace is going to learn that running a manufacturing company isn't like running a marketing campaign, and when she does, her clients are going to need somewhere to go. Send me your proposal. If it's solid, we'll talk terms. I hung up and looked at Elise. She was still standing by the broken mug, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm going to my office, I said. Harold? She reached across the table. Are you okay? Really? I'm better than okay. Grace just gave me the best gift she possibly could. She set me free. I spent the next 2 days in my home office building a proposal that would either launch my future or prove I was delusional. 30 pages of client analysis, contract timelines, vendor relationships, production capacity projections, and financial models. I identified 8 contracts at Hubbard that were up for renewal in the next 6 months, total value of $14 million, and I knew 4 of those clients personally. They'd take my call. Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in Edmund's conference room. He read through the proposal carefully, occasionally making notes in the margins. Finally, he looked up. This is thorough. You've identified 8 contracts at Hubert that are up for renewal in the next 6 months. Total value of $14 million. And I know 4 of those clients personally. They'll take my call. What about non-competes? I had my attorney review my separation agreement last night. Grace was so eager to get rid of me that she offered a standard package. No non-compete clause. I'm free to work in the industry immediately. Edmund smiled. It was the smile of a businessman who just spotted an opportunity. 60-40. That's my offer. You're buying 20 years of relationships and expertise. You won't find that anywhere else. 55-45. And I want equity adjustment after 3 years based on performance. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. The truth was, I'd expected him to negotiate. Done. I extended my hand. Let's ruin Grace's year. We shook on it. His grip was firm, confident. This wasn't charity. This was business. Edmund saw the same thing I saw, an opportunity to capitalize on someone else's incompetence. I'll have my attorney draft the partnership agreement. We can be operational in 3 weeks if we move fast. 3 weeks? I nodded. I'll start reaching out to vendors quietly. We don't want Grace to know what's coming until we're ready to launch. That same afternoon, my phone rang. Harold? Kim? Harold? It's Daniela. Do you have a minute? Of course. What's happening? Her voice dropped. I quit this morning. I walked out and I'm not going back. What happened? Harold, it's chaos here. Blake started Monday. He immediately tried to change the production schedule to optimize efficiency, told the floor managers they were doing everything wrong. 3 of them walked out. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not sympathy. Satisfaction. Who's running production? Nobody, really. Blake's in over his head, but he won't admit it. Grace keeps having meetings with consultants. They're bleeding money on advisory fees, and they're not shipping products on time. I heard Jared Wilson from Precision Aerospace call to complain about a delayed shipment. Jared Wilson. I'd worked with Jared for 12 years, built a relationship based on reliability and quality. His contract was worth $1.8 million annually, and it was up for renewal in August. He answered on the 3rd ring. Harold Moore. Long time. Jared, how are things? Frustrated. Hubert's latest shipment was 10 days late. Cost me a penalty with my client. What the hell's going on over there? 10 days? I'd never missed a deadline by more than 48 hours in 19 years. Grace fired me. Brought in someone with 0 manufacturing experience. Place is falling apart. Silence on the other end. Then, you're kidding. You were the only reason I stayed with Hubert. I'm not with Hubert anymore. I'm launching More Rodriguez Manufacturing with Edmund Rodriguez. We're operational in 3 weeks. I wanted to give you a heads up before your contract renewal comes up. Send me information. If you can guarantee the quality and timeline I used to get, I'm interested. I'll have a proposal to you by Friday. Harold, I mean it. You leave, I leave. That simple. I felt something loosen in my chest. This was what Grace didn't understand. Manufacturing isn't about innovation or disruption. It's about relationships built over years, trust earned through consistent delivery,
Expertise proven through problem solving. You can't replace that with a resume and a smile. I appreciate that, Jared. You'll have the proposer by Friday. I made 4 more calls that week. 4 former Hubert clients. Same story every time. Delays, quality issues, frustration with Blake's changes, and interest in alternatives. By the time Edmund and I signed the partnership agreement, I had 6 clients ready to review proposals. Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing opened in mid-November. We leased space in Edmund's facility, 15,000 square feet of production floor, climate-controlled for precision work. We hired 12 experienced machinists from the available labor market, including 2 who'd quit Hubert after Blake's first week. I remembered the smell of machine oil and metal shavings from my first day in manufacturing, back when I was 24 and thought I knew everything. Took me about 6 months to realize I knew nothing. Took me another 5 years to get actually good at the work. Blake hadn't learned that lesson yet. Maybe he never would. By December, we'd signed contracts with 3 former Hubert clients, total value of $8.2 million annually. Daniela was running the office with the same efficiency she'd brought to Ernest's operation. Edmund was handling the financial side while I focused on production and client relationships. We were working 70-hour weeks, but this time I owned 45% of what I was building. Elise asked me once if I missed Hubert. I told her the truth. I missed what Hubert used to be, back when Ernest ran it with competence and integrity, but what Grace had turned it into, I didn't miss that at all. Late January, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Harold, it's Grace. Hubert, we need to talk. I almost hung up, but curiosity won. About what? I'd like to discuss bringing you back as a consultant. Blake isn't working out. I let the silence stretch. Let her sit with it. What happened to fresh thinking and disruption, Blaze? I'm willing to offer you a consulting rate of $200 an hour. $200. She thought she could buy back what she'd thrown away for $200 an hour. Grace, I bill my current clients $450 an hour, and I don't have to fix other people's mistakes. What's really happening? Her voice cracked. Actually cracked. We're losing clients. Production is behind schedule. The quality control issues are costing us hundreds of thousands in rework and penalties. My father won't return my calls. I don't know what to do. Good. She should feel that panic. She should lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering how everything fell apart so fast. That's what consequences feel like. You fired the person who knew what to do. You want my advice now? Shut it down before you lose more money. Sell the equipment, settle the contracts, and go back to marketing. Manufacturing isn't for amateurs. I can't just give up. This is my father's legacy. Your father's legacy was a profitable company that employed 60 people and served its clients with excellence. You've destroyed that in 3 months. The legacy is already gone, Grace. You're just managing the funeral now. I hung up before she could respond. February felt like building something from scratch all over again. And I mean that literally. We were setting up production lines, calibrating equipment, establishing vendor relationships that I'd spent years developing at Hubert. Except this time, every system I built belongs to me, 45% mine. That changes how you think about 70-hour weeks. Edmund handled the capital expenditures, while I focused on operations and client acquisition. Daniela managed the administrative side with the same precision she'd brought to Ernest's office. We moved fast. Had to. Every day Hubert stayed operational was another day Grace could potentially stabilize the situation, but she didn't stabilize it. She accelerated the collapse. By March, we'd signed 6 former Hubert clients, not just small accounts either. Real contracts with aerospace manufacturers, medical device companies, precision automotive suppliers, the kind of clients who'd been with Hubert for a decade or more. They didn't leave because I offered lower prices. They left because they trusted me to deliver what Blake couldn't. Our revenue projections hit $19 million for our first year. $19 million. Edmund and I sat in his office looking at the numbers, and he just shook his head. Harold, you told me 6 months. We hit this in 4. I told you Grace would fail. I didn't tell you how spectacular the failure would be. We hired 18 more employees in March and April. Machinists, quality control specialists, logistics coordinators, good people who wanted to work for a company that knew what it was doing. Several of them had worked at Hubert under Ernest. They knew the difference between competent leadership and whatever Grace was attempting. Remember when your first real job taught you that titles don't mean authority? That respect gets earned, not inherited? I learned that at 26. Grace still hadn't learned it at 34. In April, Daniela forwarded me an email chain she'd gotten from a former colleague still at Hubert. Blake Sands had been fired. Grace had personally taken over operations, or what was left of them. I read through the chain twice. Production schedules in chaos. Vendor relationships destroyed because Blake had tried to renegotiate terms without understanding the contracts. Quality control failures because Blake had eliminated redundant inspection protocols that weren't redundant at all. 9 major contracts lost. Revenue down 63% from the previous year. Grace was running the company herself now, but she didn't understand the production systems, the vendor relationships, the client requirements. She was drowning, and there was nobody left to throw her a rope. How long do you think they have? Elise asked when I told her that night. 2 months, maybe 3 if Nest gives her money, but I don't think he will. She humiliated him by destroying what he built. Do you feel bad for her? No. She made her choices. She could have kept me on, learned the business, transitioned gradually. Instead, she fired me to make a statement. Now the statement is bankruptcy. In May, Edmund called me into his office. His face was serious. Harold, I just got a call from a liquidation attorney. Hubert Manufacturing is filing Chapter 7. They're auctioning the equipment and facility in June. Creditors are going to get pennies on the dollar. I felt a rush of something, not quite satisfaction, something colder. Good. There's more. Grace is personally liable for some of the debts. She gave personal guarantees on loans when the company started missing payment. She's going to lose everything. She should have thought about that before she fired me. The bankruptcy auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-June. I told Elise I was going. Why? You don't need anything from there. I need to see it, the end of what she destroyed. I drove to the facility, the same building I'd walked into for 19 years and 8 months. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to the liquidation company and potential buyers. Inside, the factory floor was silent. The machines I'd maintained, the systems I'd built, all sitting idle with tags hanging from them. Lot numbers, reserve prices, everything Ernest had built reduced to line items in an auction catalog. Grace was there. She looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her. The expensive wardrobe was gone. She wore jeans and a plain blouse. She saw me and froze. Harold. Grace, are you here to bid? Edmund might be. I'm just observing. She looked around at the empty facility. Her voice was quiet. You were right about everything. I destroyed this place. Yes, you did. My father won't speak to me. The employees hate me. I'm personally bankrupt. I'm going to lose my condo. Her voice wavered. I'm sorry I fired you. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry for all of it. I looked at her for a long moment. This was the woman who'd ended my career at Hubert with a smug smile, who'd called me old guard, who'd dismissed 20 years of work because she wanted to make a statement. Grace, here's what you need to understand. I'm not sorry. You firing me was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm running a company that's going to do $23 million in revenue that I own 45% of it. I have clients who respect me, employees who trust me, and a partner who values my expertise. You didn't ruin my life. You freed me to build something better. Then why are you here? To watch the consequences. You didn't just fire me, Grace. You disrespected everything your father built. You dismissed people who'd given decades to this company. You thought you were smarter than everyone else. This, I gestured at the empty factory floor. This is what happens when arrogance meets incompetence. Tears ran down her face. I know all of that. But can't you feel even a little sorry for me? No, because you never felt sorry for me. You never considered what firing me would do to my family, my career, my life. You just wanted me gone. Now you're gone. That's called karma, Grace, and it's beautiful. I walked out before she could respond. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The vindication was complete. Grace had gambled everything on her own arrogance and lost. I'd built something better from the wreckage of her incompetence. Elise was in the kitchen when I walked in. How was it? Exactly what she deserved. My phone rang. Edmund. Harold, we have a problem. A serious problem. The lightness vanished. What kind of problem? Morton Industries. Their CEO just called. They're threatening to sue us for breach of contract. 7-figure damages. We need to talk now. I stared at my phone. Edmund's voice was tight with something I'd never heard from him before. Actual fear. What do you mean they're threatening to sue? Can you come to the office? This isn't a phone conversation. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Edmund in his conference room. He slid a folder across the table. Morton Industries. You remember the contract we signed in March? Of course I remember. $900,000.
Deal. We've been delivering components on schedule for 3 months. What's the problem? Their CEO called this afternoon. They're claiming the components don't meet specifications. They're threatening breach of contract, $700,000 in penalties, plus the cost of reworking every component we've delivered. I opened the folder. Engineering reports, measurement analyses, contract specifications. The numbers blurred together for a moment before snapping into focus. Their engineering team is saying what exactly? That the tolerances are off by 0.003 inches. I looked up. That's within industry standard. I know, but it's not within their contract specifications. I flipped to the contract terms, read them once, then again, then a third time because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. These tolerances are insane. Who the hell negotiated this? Edmund's face was grim. Blake Sands when he was at Hubert Manufacturing. Morton was a Hubert client before they switched to us. The pieces clicked together like a machine I didn't want to assemble. Blake overpromised to win the contract. Exactly. And we inherited those promises when Morton switched to us after Hubert collapsed. I sat back in my chair. The vindication I'd felt watching Grace's company get auctioned off, that lightness, that sense of complete victory evaporated. If they sue and win, $700,000 in penalties plus rework costs on every component. Harold, we're talking about $1 million, maybe more. It could sink us. You know that feeling when you're driving and suddenly realize the car ahead of you has stopped and you're going too fast to brake in time? That moment when physics takes over and you know the impact is coming no matter what you do. That's what I felt sitting in Edmund's conference room. I'd built something real over the past 8 months. Real clients, real revenue, real ownership. And now Blake Sands, the tech startup fraud who'd helped Grace destroy Hubert Manufacturing, was reaching forward from his own failure to destroy what I'd built. Get me everything, every engineering report, every quality control document, every piece of communication with Morton. I need to see exactly what we're dealing with. Edmund pushed a second folder across the table. It's all here. Harold, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Go ahead. Did you review this contract before we signed it? The question hit like a punch. You're asking if this is my fault. I'm asking if we missed something, if there's exposure I don't know about. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell Edmund that questioning me after everything I delivered was insulting, but he was right to ask. This was his capital on the line, too. I reviewed the contract. I saw Morton was a former Hubert client. I didn't flag the tolerance specifications as unusual because I assumed they were standard terms that had been working for years. I didn't know Blake had made promises he couldn't keep. So we walked into a trap. We inherited a disaster. There's a difference. I stood up. Give me 2 days. I'm going to figure out how deep this goes. I drove home with the folders on the passenger seat. Elise was already asleep. I went straight to my home office, turned on the desk lamp, and started reading. The contract specifications were buried in Section 7, Subsection 3, tolerance requirements for each component type. I pulled out my calculator and started running production cost analyses. At midnight, I confirmed what I'd suspected. The tolerances Blake had promised were technically achievable, barely, but economically insane. Each component required 3 times the normal production time, triple the quality control checks, specialized tooling that we'd had to purchase specifically for this contract. We'd been losing money on every piece we delivered to Morton. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. We'd signed 11 contracts over the past 8 months. Morton was the only one losing us money, but it was losing us enough to offset the profit from 2 other contracts. Why hadn't I caught this during the March review? Because I'd been focused on winning clients away from Grace, on proving that her firing me was the worst mistake of her life, on building something that would eclipse what she'd destroyed. I'd been so focused on victory that I'd missed the landmine Blake had planted. At 1 a.m, I found Blake's emails to Morton from his time at Hubert. Edmund had gotten access to Hubert's servers during the bankruptcy proceedings, standard due diligence for a potential equipment buyer. I read Blake's promises to Morton's CEO. Industry-leading precision, unmatched quality control, tolerances that exceed aerospace standards, all the buzzwords that sounded impressive in a sales pitch but meant nothing in actual production. Blake had made promises he knew he couldn't keep. He'd won the contract, collected his bonus or salary or whatever Grace had paid him, and then gotten fired before the consequences arrived. Now those consequences were sitting in my home office at 1:30 in the morning. I found production schedules from Hubert's final months. They'd been delivering Morton components at a loss, too. Grace probably never even realized it because she didn't understand production economics. She'd just seen revenue and assumed it meant profit. At 2 in the morning, I pulled up Richard Castellan's profile, Morton's CEO.
Manufacturing executive, ran a mid-sized firm that supplied components to medical device companies. He knew production economics. He absolutely knew the tolerances in his contract were unreasonable, which meant he was using them as leverage. He could force us into rework that would bankrupt us, or he could extract a settlement that would maul our growth and establish precedent that Moore Rodriguez couldn't deliver on contracts. Either way, we lost. At 2:30, I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to my attorney, William Parker. Then I stopped. I needed more than legal advice. I needed a strategy that would turn this trap into consequences for the people who'd set it. Blake Sands had made fraudulent promises. Grace Hubert had signed off on those promises without understanding them. Morton Industries was trying to weaponize those promises against me. I sat there in the dark, the only light coming from my desk lamp, and felt something I hadn't felt since the morning Grace fired me. Pure, cold rage. I'd spent 8 months building something real. I'd earned every client, every contract, every dollar of revenue. I'd worked 70-hour weeks while Grace's company collapsed under her incompetence. I'd proven that experience and competence mattered more than arrogance and privilege. And now, Grace's incompetence was reaching forward in time to destroy me. The clock on my desk read 3 p.m. I closed the folders and turned off the lamp. I needed sleep. Tomorrow, I'd start building the counterstrike. Blake Sands thought he could make promises and walk away from the consequences. He was about to learn otherwise. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I lay in bed next to Elise, staring at the ceiling, running calculations in my head. Morton Industries was trying to use Blake's fraudulent promises to destroy what I'd built. But Blake had left a trail. He always left a trail. Guys like him couldn't help themselves. They needed to brag, to justify, to explain their clever strategies to someone. I just needed to find where he'd bragged. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. Elise found me at the kitchen table at 6, surrounded by notes. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" "Couldn't, but I have a plan." She sat down across from me, still in her robe. "What kind of plan?" "The kind that makes Blake Sands face consequences for every lie he told." At 7:30, I called William Parker. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Harold, it's not even 8 yet. I need you to review a contract for potential fraud." That woke him up. "What kind of fraud?" "The kind where someone promises specifications they know can't be met economically, then uses those specifications as leverage for a lawsuit. Blake Sands made promises to Morton Industries that were designed to fail. He knew the tolerances were impossible to achieve profitably. He made them anyway to win the contract and collect his bonus. Then he left before the consequences arrived. Now Morton's trying to use those promises to bankrupt my company." William was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious accusation, Harold. You're talking about intentional fraud, not just overpromising. I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I have documentation. Blake's emails to Morton from his time at Hubert Manufacturing, production cost analyses that show he knew the margins were impossible, and I can get testimony from former Hubert employees who heard him say he didn't care about long-term viability. He just wanted to win the contract. If you can prove all that, Morton's lawsuit becomes their liability, not yours. But Harold, this is a heavy lift. You need hard evidence. Emails where he explicitly acknowledges the problem, internal documents showing he understood the economics, witnesses who will testify under oath. I'll get you everything. Just be ready to move fast when I do. Get me the evidence. If it's as strong as you say, we'll file a counterclaim that'll make Morton wish they'd never threatened you." I hung up and immediately called Edmund Rodriguez. He answered on the 1st ring. "Harold, I was about to call you. I've been thinking about the Morton situation all night." "Harold, I need access to every email Blake sent from our server. Everything he communicated to clients, vendors, anyone during his time at Hubert before they went bankrupt." "Harold, Blake never worked for us. He worked for Hubert." "I know, but we acquired some of Hubert's client files during the bankruptcy proceedings, right? Due diligence documents, contract histories, communication records?" "Yes, but I need those files. All of them. And I need you to trust me for the next 72 hours without asking questions. Can you do that?" The line went silent. I could hear Edmund breathing, thinking, weighing risks against trust. Finally, You've earned my trust, Harold. You've built this company from nothing in 8 months. If you say you need this, I believe you. Do what you need to do. Thank you. I'll explain everything when it's over. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment. 2 parts of the plan were in motion. Now came the hardest part. I dialed Victor Clarkson's number, Grace's lawyer, the man who'd sat next to her in that conference room 8 months ago when she'd fired me with that smug smile. He answered professionally. Victor Clarkson.
What can I do for you? I need information about Blake Sands, specifically about the contracts he negotiated at Hubert Manufacturing before the bankruptcy. I can't share confidential client information. Blake defrauded clients by making promises he knew couldn't be kept. Morton Industries is threatening to sue my company because of specifications Blake set. Those same fraudulent specifications contributed to Hubert's bankruptcy. If you cooperate with me, I'll make sure the bankruptcy trustee knows Blake's contracts were part of what destroyed the company. That might reduce Grace's personal liability. I let that sink in. Grace was personally liable for hundreds of thousands in Hubert's debts. If we could prove Blake's fraud contributed to the bankruptcy, some of that liability might shift away from her. Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. What exactly do you need? Blake's employment file from Hubert, his contract negotiations with Morton Industries, and any emails or internal documents where he discussed the Morton specifications or the production economics. Anything that shows he knew the contract terms were unsustainable. That's a lot of material from a bankrupt company's files. You're representing Grace in the bankruptcy proceedings. You have access to everything. And Victor, Grace is facing financial ruin because Blake made promises that destroyed her company. Don't you think she deserves to know the truth about what he did? Another long silence, then. I'll see what I can do. No promises. That's all I'm asking. I hung up and sat back in my chair. 3 phone calls. 3 pieces of a strategy that either proved Blake committed fraud or I was chasing ghosts. Elise appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee. What did you just do? I set a trap for a con artist. Now we wait and see if he was stupid enough to leave evidence. The next 48 hours crawled by like weeks. Edmund sent over the files we'd acquired during the bankruptcy proceedings. Hundreds of pages of contracts, emails, production schedules, and client communications. I read through everything, looking for Blake's fingerprints. I found them everywhere. Emails where he'd promised aerospace-grade precision to clients who made consumer products. Production schedules that showed he'd committed to delivery timelines that required overtime the company couldn't afford. Quality control protocols he'd streamlined by cutting the inspection steps that prevented errors. Blake hadn't just overpromised to Morton Industries, he'd overpromised to everyone. He'd built his entire tenure at Hubert on unsustainable commitments that looked impressive on paper, but collapsed under scrutiny. On the second day, Victor Clarkson called. Mr. Moore, I'm sending you a file. Blake's employment records from Hubert Manufacturing, contract negotiations with Morton Industries, and some email exchanges between Blake and Grace that you'll find very interesting. What kind of exchanges? The kind where he explicitly tells her the Morton contract is short-term revenue and long-term problem. He recommended they deliver the first few shipments to specification, then renegotiate terms once Morton was committed to our production schedule. Grace signed off on the strategy. Then she fired you before the renegotiation could happen. And Blake left before the consequences arrived. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Send me everything. The files arrived 30 minutes later. I opened Blake's emails first. There it was, in plain text. An email from Blake to Grace dated 4 months before she'd fired me. The Morton contract is short-term revenue, long-term problem. Tolerances are technically achievable but not economically sustainable at the pricing we've committed to. Recommend we deliver first 3 to 4 shipments to specification, then approach Morton about tolerance adjustment or price increase once they're committed to our production schedule. This is standard practice in competitive bidding. Grace's response, approved. Let's win the contract and worry about adjustments later. I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded everything to William Parker with a 2-word message. Call me. He called 6 hours later. Harold, this is fraud. Clear, documented fraud. Blake Sands intentionally negotiated a contract he knew would fail.
He explicitly told Grace it was unsustainable. He recommended a bait-and-switch strategy to Grace Hubert. And when Morton inherited that fraudulent contract,
Through their relationship with Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing, they'd inherited Blake's lies. We weren't just defending ourselves, we were going on offense. It's done, Bill called to confirm. Filed and served. Morton's attorneys will have it by end of business today, and Blake, he'll be served Monday morning. He's not going to see this coming. I allowed myself a small smile. Blake had spent his entire career making promises he couldn't keep, then moving on before the consequences arrived. Not this time. The weekend felt like waiting for a verdict. Elise asked me twice if I was okay, and both times I told her the truth. I was better than okay. I was watching someone who had tried to destroy my company get exactly what he deserved. Monday morning, my phone rang at 8:45. Unknown number. Harold Moore. Mr. Moore, this is David Brennan from Castellano and Wright. We represent Morton Industry. We've reviewed your counterclaim and we'd like to discuss settlement. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. Our client had no knowledge of Mr. Sands's fraudulent representations regarding the contract specifications. We believe Morton Industries was a victim in this situation, as were you. We'd like to resolve this matter without protracted litigation. What are you proposing? We'll withdraw our lawsuit against Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing if you'll complete the current contract at the original specifications. Going forward, we'd like to renegotiate terms that are economically reasonable for both parties. We value the relationship and the quality of your work. The specifications were the problem, not your performance. I let that sit for a moment. They were offering exactly what I needed. Vindication without bankruptcy. And Blake Sands? We're exploring our own fraud claims against Mr. Sands. He misrepresented his capabilities to us as well. His emails to our CEO promised tolerances that your documentation proves he knew were impossible to achieve profitably. We were misled, and we intend to hold him accountable. Send me the settlement terms in writing. If they're fair, we have a deal. We'll have them to you by end of day. I hung up and sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days from filing to settlement, because the evidence was undeniable. Edmund appeared in my doorway. He must have been waiting. What just happened? Morton backed down. They reviewed the counterclaim, realized Blake defrauded them the same way he'd defrauded us, and they want to settle. We'll complete this contract, renegotiate fair terms going forward, and Morton's going after Blake for fraud. Edmund walked into my office and closed the door behind him. Harold, how did you do that? We were looking at $700,000 in penalties 4 days ago. Now Morton's withdrawing their lawsuit and going after Blake instead. I pulled up the email thread on my screen. Blake's messages to Grace, the production cost analyses, the testimony from former Hubert employees. 20 years of knowing how to document everything, how to build a case, how to protect myself with evidence instead of excuses. I documented everything, every email, every cost analysis, every conversation. I proved Blake was a fraud with his own words, and I made sure the consequences landed on him, not us. Edmund shook his head slowly. Grace fired you because she thought you were old guard. You just outmaneuvered a CEO, a lawyer, and a con artist using nothing but evidence and strategy. That's not old guard, that's mastery. That's what 20 years of experience looks like, Edmund. You learn to protect yourself. You learn to build cases. You learn that evidence beats bluster every single time. I closed the email. Grace never understood that. She thought experience meant outdated. She never realized experience means prepared. Blake's going to get destroyed by this. Good. He spent his entire career making promises he couldn't keep, then abandoning ship before the bill came due. Morton's going to sue him. We could sue him. Hubert's bankruptcy trustee could go after him for fraudulent contracts that contributed to the company's collapse. He's going to spend the next year in depositions and settlement negotiations. Edmund sat down across from my desk. And us? We complete the Morton contract. We renegotiate fair terms. We keep building. I looked at him. This was supposed to destroy us, Edmund. Blake's fraud was supposed to sink Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing before we really got started. Instead, it's going to destroy him. Karma. Justice.
There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, our production floor was running at full capacity, machines humming, workers focused, systems functioning, exactly as I designed them. Karma implies luck. This wasn't luck. This was deliberate. I saw the threat. I investigated the source. I built the case, and I made sure the person responsible faced the consequences. Grace could have had this. She could have had you doing this for her company. She could have had a lot of things. Instead, she fired me to make a statement. Now the statement is bankruptcy, personal ruin, and working retail while her father's legacy gets auctioned for pennies. I turned back to Edmund. Some people learn from their mistakes. Some people don't get the chance because their mistakes destroy them first. My phone buzzed. From David Brennan at Castellano & Wright. Settlement terms attached.
Opened the document and read through it carefully. Morton would withdraw all claims. Moore Rodriguez would complete the current contract at the original specifications, which would cost us money, but not $700,000. Future contracts would be negotiated with reasonable tolerances and pricing. Both parties would cooperate in any legal action against Blake Sands. Fair, reasonable, exactly what I'd wanted. Send your response, Edmund said. Let's close this. I typed out my acceptance and hit send. 3 months had passed since that terrible phone call in June when Edmund told me about Morton's lawsuit. 3 months of investigation, strategy, and calculated strikes. Now it was over, and Blake Sands was facing fraud claims from multiple directions, while Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing moved forward stronger than before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to someone, it's making sure they do it to themselves. 3 months after the Morton settlement in late October, Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing hit $26 million in annual revenue. We'd hired 42 employees, signed contracts with 11 former Hubert clients, plus 6 new ones who'd heard about our reputation. Edmund and I were discussing expansion into a second facility, something in Texas, closer to the aerospace manufacturers who were becoming our biggest customers. I was feeling good. Better than good, actually. Everything I'd built over the past year was working exactly how I'd planned it. That's when I saw Grace. I'd stopped at the grocery store on my way home from the office, just needed to grab a few things for dinner. Walked up to the register with milk, bread, some chicken. The cashier looked up and I froze. Grace Hubert, wearing a polo shirt with the logo, name tag pinned to her chest, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of that expensive salon style she used to wear. She saw me before I could turn away. Harold. Grace. Her hands shook slightly as she started scanning my items. I'm back in school, getting an MBA, trying to learn what I should have learned before I took over my father's company. I didn't say anything, just watched her scan the milk, the bread, the chicken, mechanical movements, practiced efficiency. This was someone who inherited a $42 million company and was now working minimum wage because she'd destroyed everything her father built. I heard your company is doing well, she said quietly. We are. She finished scanning and gave me the total. I pulled out my credit card and inserted it into the reader. The machine beeped, processing. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could have just left, taken my groceries and walked out, never said another word to her. But something in me needed her to understand, really understand what she'd done wrong. Grace, can I tell you something? She looked up. Sure. I waited for the receipt to print, took my time pulling it from the machine. Then I looked directly at her. You didn't fail because you were young or inexperienced. You failed because you were arrogant. You thought you knew better than everyone who came before you. You dismissed expertise as obsolescence. You valued disruption over competence. That's why you're here, scanning groceries, and I'm running a company that's eating your father's market share. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. The customer behind me shifted impatiently, but I didn't care. I know, Grace said. Her voice cracked. You're right about all of it. Good. Because the only way you're going to recover from this is if you actually learn the lesson. Respect the people who came before you. Value experience. Understand that real success isn't about innovation. It's about execution. You can have all the fresh perspectives in the world, Grace, but if you can't execute, if you can't deliver, if you can't maintain the systems that actually generate revenue, then you've got nothing. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm trying. Try harder.
I picked up my groceries and walked out. The customer behind me immediately stepped forward, and I heard Grace's voice shake as she greeted them. I didn't look back. Didn't feel sympathy. Didn't feel satisfaction either, really. Just closure. Grace had made her choices. She'd fired me to make a statement. She dismissed 20 years of expertise because she thought she was smarter than her father's generation. Now she was learning what happens when arrogance meets reality. I drove home thinking about that conversation, about the tears in her eyes, about the way she'd admitted I was right. Some people need to lose everything to learn anything. Grace was one of those people. 2 months later, in December, Elise and I were hosting Christmas dinner for the entire Moore Rodriguez manufacturing leadership team. Edmund and his wife Maria arrived first, carrying wine and dessert. Then Daniela with her husband, our production managers Steve and Marcus, our lead engineers Jennifer and Tom. 15 people total, who'd built something extraordinary in just over a year. The house smelled of roasted turkey and fresh bread. Elise had gone all out. Her grandmother's recipes, the good china, candles on every surface. She loved hosting, loved bringing people together, and tonight felt special because these weren't just employees. These were the people who'd believed in what we were building. Edmund raised his glass once everyone had arrived. To Harold, the man who turned getting fired into the best business decision any of us ever made. Everyone laughed and drank. I felt Elise's hand squeeze mine.
Under the table. To all of you, I said. A year ago, I was standing in a conference room getting terminated by someone who didn't understand the first thing about manufacturing. Tonight, I'm standing here with people who do, people who value competence, people who execute. That's the difference between a company that collapses in 6 months and a company that hits 26 million in year 1. More laughter, more drinks. The conversation flowed easily. Stories from the production floor, jokes about difficult clients, plans for the Texas expansion. Later after dinner, Daniela pulled me aside in the kitchen. I heard Blake Sands settled the fraud claims, paid for $400,000 to make them go away. His reputation is destroyed. No one in manufacturing will touch him. Good. And Grace? Still working retail, still in school. Maybe she'll figure it out. Maybe she won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Daniela smiled. You're not even a little bit sympathetic. No. She had every advantage. Money, connections, a profitable company handed to her on a silver platter. She threw it away because she thought she was smarter than everyone else. Some people need to lose everything to learn anything. Grace is one of those people. Daniela studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. She returned to the dining room. I stayed in the kitchen, loading plates into the dishwasher, listening to the laughter and conversation filtering in from the other room. These were good people. People who'd taken a risk on a brand new company. People who'd worked their tails off to make Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing succeed. A year ago, I'd been standing in Grace's conference room getting terminated. Tonight, I was hosting the team that proved Grace wrong about everything. Elise came in carrying empty wine glasses. You okay? I'm more than okay. I'm satisfied. I rinsed a plate and slid it into the rack. Grace tried to end my career. Instead, she launched it. I own 45% of a company that's going to do $30 million next year. I'm building something that's mine, and every day I'm proving that experience, competence, and respect matter more than arrogance and disruption. What happens if Grace turns it around? If she learns from this and comes back stronger? I thought about that question. Pictured Grace at that grocery store register, tears in her eyes, admitting I was right. Then good for her. But she'll never come back in manufacturing. She burned every bridge in this industry. The name Hubert used to mean quality and reliability. Now it means failure and bankruptcy. That's her legacy. And yours? Mine is that I refused to be a victim. When Grace fired me, I didn't collapse. I didn't beg for my job back. I built something better. That's the story I want people to remember. Elise kissed my cheek. That's exactly the story they'll remember. We finished cleaning up and rejoined the party. Edmund was telling a story about our first major contract negotiation, embellishing the details for dramatic effect. Maria was laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Daniela's husband was debating production methodology with our engineers. This was what success looked like. Not just revenue numbers or employee counts. This. People gathered around a table celebrating what they'd built together.
I raised my glass one more time before everyone left. To next year, to Texas. To proving that when you build something the right way, with the right people, the right values, the right commitment to excellence, you don't just survive, you thrive. Everyone drank, and I meant every word. Epilogue. It's been 2 years since Grace fired me. 2 years since I walked out of that conference room knowing my life at Hubert Manufacturing was over. 2 years since I called Edmund Rodriguez and proposed a partnership that would change everything. Moore Rodriguez Manufacturing just hit $48 million in annual revenue. We employ 83 people across 2 facilities, with a 3rd location opening in Texas next quarter. Edmund and I are discussing taking the company public in the next 3 years. The analysts we've talked to think we could be looking at a valuation north of $200 million. I own 45% of that. Let me say it again, because it still feels surreal sometimes. I own 45% of a company worth $200 million, all because Grace Hubert thought I was replaceable. I heard through the industry grapevine that Ernest Hubert died last spring. Heart attack. He was 78. Built a company from nothing, watched his daughter destroy it in 6 months and died estranged from her. Grace inherited what was left of his estate, which wasn't much after the bankruptcy, the legal fees, the personal guarantees she'd made on loans that defaulted. She's still working retail, still finishing her MBA at some community college. I heard she's dating a guy who works in insurance. They say she's quieter now, humbler, that she doesn't talk about her father's company anymore. Good. Maybe she's finally learning the lessons she should have learned before she took over. Maybe she'll rebuild her life into something meaningful. Or maybe she won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Blake Sands left the industry entirely. Last I heard, he's selling real estate in Arizona, Scottsdale or Tempe, somewhere like that. His LinkedIn still says he scaled a manufacturing operation, but everyone who knows the truth knows he's a fraud. The $400,000 he paid to settle the fraud claims wiped out whatever savings he had. His reputation is radioactive. No serious company in manufacturing will touch him. That's what happens when you make promises you can't keep, when you prioritize short-term wins over long-term sustainability, when you think you can fake expertise that takes decades to build. Blake learned that lesson the expensive way. As for me, I wake up every day knowing I own 45% of something real, something I built with my own expertise, relationships, and strategic thinking. Grace thought she was firing dead weight. Instead, she cut the anchor that was keeping her inheritance afloat, and I floated straight to the top. Some people call that revenge. I call it justice. If you've ever been fired by someone who didn't appreciate what you brought to the table, remember this. Their loss doesn't have to be your loss. Sometimes getting fired is the universe telling you to stop building someone else's dream and start building your own. Grace learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it at exactly the right time, and that's made all the difference. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day.